It's all underpinned by that stronger landlord-tenant relationship and doing things differently and more collaboratively.
Welcome to Thrivalism, Interaction's podcast focused on the art of thriving, flourishing and evolving under any conditions. In this series, we'll examine how to create thriving businesses, culture, careers and places. We'll explore key topics such as workplace design and build, culture and community, sustainability and, of course, the future of work. Join us and our guests as we explore how people and businesses can set themselves up to thrive, not just survive. I'm joined by Paul Richardson, who's the asset manager of CEG, a national developer currently building one of the most sustainable office buildings in the UK. Paul is passionate about buildings that create a positive impact on people, communities and the environment they sit. And it's really great to have you on Thrivalism, Paul.
That's great. Thanks for inviting us, Dieter. Good to join you.
So, on the face of it, looking at your CV, you've got a degree in estate management, you've been a surveyor in various kind of UK practices before joining CEG as an asset manager. That's a typical career path for someone to be successful in property. I suppose there must have been some challenges and some people on the way who've made that journey interesting. Could you pick a few of those for us?
I think that the one thing to say with regard to any career in property is never 2 days are the same throughout. So I started life as a grad working in property management and then working through landlord and tenant agency work before joining CEG back in 2007. And obviously the journey through with CEG has been interesting over those years. Business has changed significantly, and I think we'll probably end up touching on a lot of these points as we go through the podcast. But I think one of the most interesting things is the sort of dynamics between landlords and tenants. The old sort of adversarial relationship of a number of years ago has given way to a much more sort of collaborative way of working, which is, being open and honest makes our job a lot more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting that you've picked that as the thing that has changed the most in your career. I didn't know if you were going to grasp at the effects of, the recession, just as you joined CEG or some of the major projects that you've been involved in. Obviously, that for you is a real key thing that has changed that relationship.
Yeah, it's something that I'm very passionate about, and even joining as a grad, I couldn't really get my head around this sort of approach that seemed to be ingrained in the industry, whereby whatever a tenant would ask a landlord, the sort of initial reaction was to say no. From early in my career, always adopted an approach of understanding and reasoning in terms of any dealings with occupiers. And I'm pleased to see that that's sort of made its way into the mainstream, or it's certainly making its way into the mainstream. And I think that has given way to a lot of the trends that we're seeing, and no doubt we'll chat around in terms of sustainability and requirements for flexible space, etc. It's all underpinned by that stronger landlord-tenant relationship and doing things differently and more collaboratively.
I suppose it's not only the relationships with the occupiers who are in the building, but also the kind of the cities that you guys build in and the communities that you build in. And I suppose there is an expectation these days that the buildings you create add benefit to the community around them. What's the hardest challenge of making that balance with investors?
It's a challenge that is becoming easier in the sense that occupiers are looking for buildings that are ingrained in a community and have a long-term vision and long-term purpose. I think there are a lot of occupiers out there that have been stung by end-of-term costs, unexpected dilapidations, etc., etc. All pointing back to this sort of more adversarial world between landlord and tenant. And I think now, and certainly from CEG's perspective, where we can take a long-term investor approach to a lot of our schemes, we can look at things differently. So we can look at providing flex space to supplement occupiers in taking their traditional space, giving occupiers an opportunity to grow their businesses and flex their businesses within office space. And it's looking at it from the occupier perspective as opposed to just purely from the investor perspective.
Do you think it's the change of the personalities within the property industry that has just naturally evolved that, or is it absolutely market driven?
I think, in all honesty, it's a bit of both, really. I think businesses themselves have changed. We've seen examples of, particularly legal companies where they've changed their structures. They have a more sort of flatline structure at the top of these businesses because they recognise that people, and again, this is pre-COVID, people didn't necessarily have the aspirations to move through the business, to get to partner, to continue to relentlessly chase down work and win work. They recognised that people were trying to move on with their careers, but also value their work life and their home life and their family life, etc. So we've seen businesses react to what people are looking for. And then we've also seen that reaction from businesses in terms of how that then impacts their real estate strategy as well. And again, it makes our role so much more interesting now that businesses are typically looking at workspace more as a strategic tool within or as part of their business plan, as opposed to this sort of necessary overhead that they need in order to operate. And that's really refreshing, and it just gives us an opportunity to work with businesses to really try and add value, as all other industries do, to their customers.
Obviously, we're talking about the demands of the occupiers, and so many of the conversations that we hear are all about sustainability, and that's a proper focus for everybody who's in our industry now. They are clearly very vital conversations, but there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of conflicting messages, there's lots of complicated standards that the people don't understand, and different interpretations of what should and shouldn't be done and what can be achieved. What would you say, as someone who's standing outside our industry, what are the things that they should really focus on? I
think one of the issues are that there are so many accreditations within the industry, ranging from BREEAM, EPC, a design for performance approach, Neighbours, which is a new Better Buildings partnership-backed scheme that was launched earlier this year. And there's also a lot of conversation around carbon and the carbon performance of buildings, both in operation and embodied carbon, which is carbon in construction. We are seeing that industry-backed bodies are now building frameworks and ways of effectively allowing you to audit your credentials against these badges. So, as an example, the UK GBC recently launched a scope and definition of their approach to carbon net zero in operation. And what that allows us to do is finally benchmark that, because prior to that UK GBC definition being presented, the industry was making statements around carbon performance without effectively having a benchmark to sit against. That, we feel, is a game changer, and I think it's, as a business for CEG, it's really important that we are able to make statements against industry recognised approaches.
Is there a danger, I suppose, that it adds to the many accreditations that you are expected to perform against? And I suppose the occupiers are saying, make this simpler for us. We want to engage. We want to make sure we're in the very best buildings. It's really important for us as a business and for our customers and for our staff. And they want to, I suppose, have less accreditations that they can deal with.
I think the answer is education on all sides, both on the developer's side in terms of the products, what they're delivering and how they're accrediting against that product, the agents in terms of being the main conduits between developers and occupiers, but also from an occupier perspective in terms of what really adds value to them and to their business. We have examples of businesses being very clear that they require an EPC A-rated building, the perception being that building therefore operates using less energy. But we know that a deeper dive that there are examples nationally of buildings that have lower EPC state ratings that actually use less energy than EPCA, for example, rated buildings. So it's that sort of education, but I think what it nicely does is kind of loop us back around to what I was saying at the beginning in terms of opening the dialogue between landlords and tenants and having a more collaborative approach to understanding each other's propositions, both the landlord to understand what tenants are looking for, but also for the tenants to engage with landlords to understand the messages that we're trying to promote.
Absolutely. Obviously, sustainability is only part of the picture. And getting the energy to that building is really, really critical. There's a lot of complex issues and myths, I suppose, around green energy for these buildings. How do you break that down and make it simple for occupiers to understand that element?
Again, that's been driven by changes within the industry and changes within regulations and what is defined as green energy. And the UK GBC are doing a lot of work around that in terms of helping with that definition that allows third parties to really audit how landlords are procuring their green energy and therefore how that green energy is then being badged. And I think a really, really key point on that is the process of additionality in terms of what is delivered within that green energy.
Yeah. In terms of, obviously green energy, the accreditations with those buildings, a lot of complex issues going on. You obviously always want to do the right thing, but there are tough investment decisions to make in order to achieve the standards that you guys aspire to. How tough are those investment decisions and how difficult are the conversations to keep track internally?
I think in terms of the principle and our aspiration to deliver sustainable buildings, that's very much at the heart of CEG and the heart of our business. One of the biggest challenges is the change in technology, the speed of change in technology, and it's a really exciting time. We specified some light fittings only very recently, which we're now going back into the design to look at because we've identified a much more energy efficient system. That's the physical product. On top of that, you have other changes in technology, the rise of smart technology. The approach to delivering smart-enabled buildings is, in a way, is very similar to sustainability in terms of there is a lot of noise around smart buildings and smart tech, and there are a lot of gimmicks that flow from that noise. What we want to do, and as we've done with sustainability, is make sure that we interrogate our approach to smart as we do with sustainability to make sure we're delivering design that drives real value and real performance for occupiers. I think there's a risk that some of the smart tech that we're seeing in the market can be classed as a bit gimmicky to unlock marketing conversations. That's not something that really sits well within our business. So on the smart, for example, we're keen to ensure that when we look at smart technology, we want to ensure that it's fulfilling either a better interaction between people and the building. It helps drive performance in terms of sustainability, so that ability to better control your local environments. Or alternatively, we're designing the building so it is future-proofed to accommodate future smart technology going forward. And I think those are really key values that occupiers can really realise from smart tech, as opposed to a wayfinding system, for example, that you can download on your phone to find your way around the building. I mean, ultimately, if you have to use a phone to find your way around the building, something's gone wrong with the building design. That's very much our approach to that.
I mean, obviously the investment conversations that you guys are having on one side of it, and the occupier conversations where the type of occupiers you guys are attracting have a very clear environmental and sustainability agenda. How different has the seriousness of those conversations become in the last 2 or 3 years in terms of, obviously these things attract cost and the tenants ultimately have to pay that. Do you feel there's been a significant shift in the last 2 or 3 years with occupiers?
I think there has. I think pre-COVID, we were starting to see a trend of occupiers making moves to quality in terms of the quality of buildings that they were occupying. We fully expect that to be a trend that will accelerate post-COVID. We are seeing examples of that in different markets. And I think a lot of it loops back to earlier points that we made in the conversation around occupiers and their approach to putting people first within their business. People costs is the highest cost for most businesses. Therefore, businesses have realised that there is value in delivering services and offers within their business that adds value to their people, and therefore it helps attract, retain the best people within their business. So I think putting that to one side, occupiers can see the value in the real estate offer to support that strategy. So from an occupier's perspective, it's worth committing to the high quality building that delivers your ESG credentials, it delivers better amenity provision for your staff and helps with your staff well-being ultimately. and therefore helps drive business performance. So it's no longer just a conversation around rent rates and service charges. It's a bigger, much more interesting conversation.
I mean, definitely, I think one of the places where I'm very conscious of that happening is with the EQ building in Bristol. And of course, that evolved out of what was the Aspire building. And there were some really big changes that happened to that building from what it was to what it is now, what you guys are planning to deliver into the market. What were the kind of, I suppose, the key conversations and the key factors that made those changes?
So the original Aspire development, which was 200,000 square feet, secured planning permission back in 2014. The original business plan was effectively to secure a pre-let to fund that building, to get that going and bring it out the ground. Obviously, 2014 clashed quite closely with Brexit and various other uncertainties that were in the market, and ultimately the pre-let was not secured. The building was transferred to a different fund back in 2018. CEG were retained as investment and development managers. But importantly, the business plan changed, and it moved away from delivering the building through a pre-let route to being able to deliver the building speculatively. And in doing that, it meant that we could look at the building in a slightly different way. So we gave ourselves 12 months to reopen design packages to look at improving the design of the building to respond to what occupiers are looking for in the new world. The main packages focused on sustainability and amenity within the building. So this idea of putting people at the very heart of the building was absolutely central to that redesign and the packages that we opened for EQ. In delivering EQ, which is a building that has been a complete redesign from Aspire, we're still delivering 200,000 square feet of office space. We have similar sized floor plates at 27,000 square feet. But what we're doing is we're moving the dial on in terms of sustainability credentials. It's now the first new build office building in Bristol to commit to net carbon zero in operation in accordance with the UK GBC approach. And in addition to that, we've actually handed over nearly 10% of the floor space within the building to amenity provision. So within the EQ design, we have ground floor cafe, business lounge breakout space, fitness space. We've got a central atrium for events and presentations. And on the top floor, we've got a really cool restaurant bar with south-facing roof terrace. And I think summing all that up, as the redesign progressed, what we wanted to do was rebrand the building to reflect the values that we've just captured as part of that redesign. And in looking at that, we kept coming up with themes around balance, this idea of work-life balance within the building, which led us to terms like equilibrium. So we debated on calling the building Equilibrium, but I can't spell it, let alone pronounce it clearly. So we quickly sort of dialed that back, and that's how we arrived at EQ as the name for the building in Bristol. And essentially, in a nutshell, EQ really stands for this idea of the perfect balance. It's the idea, or it's the desire to live and work sustainably, and that's what we're trying to capture within EQ.
It's interesting that all of those factors you talk about are kind of in some ways reflect, I think, the ethos of Bristol as a place, and you guys develop in different cities around the UK. How do you feel that is something that really captures Bristol as a place and the type of occupiers that are in Bristol and want to take that kind of space?
We think it's really well tuned into Bristol. Bristol is a very young, progressive, environmentally focused city. I think that's been demonstrated over the last 12 months. Greta Thunberg came to the UK and she spoke in Bristol. Bristol has that dynamic, and we think Bristol is ready for EQ as an offer.
Obviously, this thing is forever evolving. It's forever moving forward. It was interesting. I was looking at the parallel maybe between Aspire that could have been built and EQ that is being built. And obviously, up in Leeds, you've got your Kirkstone Forge development where you've got number 1, which is built, and number 2, which is evolving as a building. What's the next phase? Do you think if your EQ was being built in 5 years' time, what are the things that are most likely to see?
Well, I think one thing to mention before sort of going into that is this sort of long-term investor approach, because what is interesting is if you design a building to perform it in operation and you apply a long-term investor approach to that, then you can continue to invest in that building, you continue to drive performance. You touched on Kirkstall Forge. That was a building that PC'd in 2017. Very successful building, fully let within 12 months. It won the BCAO award for National Best Commercial Workspace. But we didn't rest on our laurels with that building. We implemented a post-occupancy evaluation process. So we periodically undertake reviews of the building and its performance, which allows us to look at that, see whether it's performing against design, and where it isn't, make investment to improve. So one example at Kirkstall Forge is that we identified the energy usage within the building was exceeding where we were initially expecting it to be. A lot of that was driven by the amount of fresh air intake that we were delivering into the building, which was pushing energy usage up. As a result of that, we've retrospectively fitted carbon dioxide sensors back into the building, which allows us to maintain levels of fresh air that are required within the building, but actually to add better control over the energy usage around tempering that fresh air. So I think that long-term approach to managing property is going to be very important going forward, particularly as technology changes and improves. And in terms of future design, again, that's changing rapidly at the moment in terms of new technology, new materials, new levels of expectation. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time for the market going forward.
Yeah, I think it's not just design that's going to change. Like, it's exactly what you were talking about at the start. There's relationships between landlords, developers, and the occupiers. That much more aligned relationships and a much more expectation that the benefit will continue throughout the life cycle, I suppose, of their occupation. I suppose what CEG doing to make sure that they are at the forefront of that and to make sure that relationship is as close as it possibly can be.
CEG have a long-term strategic approach to property management. We manage everything in-house. So we have our own FM team, we have our own, what we refer to as being the life team, which is a dedicated team within the business that activate these amenity spaces that we're providing within buildings. We've seen examples where developers have created amenity space within buildings, but without that sort of activation and that program of events, that amenity space can sometimes just sit unused within buildings. So we're really keen on controlling as much of that experience as we can. We don't use third-party agents. We therefore feel as though we're in a better position to build up that strength and depth of relationship with occupiers going forward and ultimately engage with occupiers. So within our existing portfolio, pre-COVID, we welcomed about 25,000 people daily to the buildings. Our building managers hold regular meetings with occupiers on site to talk about a range of subjects, whether that is supporting businesses with green credentials, supporting them with their charity initiatives, or even just getting feedback around travel plan arrangements or amenity provision within the buildings. I think it all points back to landlords that can engage with tenants at the right level, in the right level of detail, but to progress a more collaborative approach to delivering benefits within real estate.
That's good. I'm super excited to see EQ go out the ground. It's obviously the guys are on site, aren't they, pulling it together. It's going to be a fantastic space for Bristol. Something that's certainly going to change the way anybody who's arrived into Bristol off the train station knows that you've got to get through some stuff before you start to really see the benefits of the city, and it's going to make a massive change. So it's really exciting, and I think the connection between EQ and the kind of streetscape there, I'm really excited about.
Absolutely, yeah. We're really excited to be on site and delivering EQ, and really excited by everything else that's happening in Bristol, the announcement of the works that will be changing Bristol Temple Mead Station, etc. There's a lot going on, and we're excited to be a part of it.
Good. It's been really interesting to hear, just trying to pull behind what's going on in terms of these new developments and some of the challenges I think which developers have and some of the solutions that you guys are putting forward with occupiers. Really interesting. And yeah, good luck with EQ. We really look forward to seeing it come out of the ground.
Very good. Thanks very much for inviting us.